My friends, the central message that I always want to share with Oversoul is that we can heal our lives. And if we can heal our lives, then we can heal our families. And if we can heal our families, then ultimately we can heal the world. And our world is in need of such deep healing right now. We're facing problems on every scale of society and the earth. We got economic problems. We got ecological problems. We have social problems, political problems, everything. And I think sometimes we think that these challenges are going to be saved from the top down. If we can just elect the right leaders, if we can just, you know, put our trust in the right governments or businesses, then somehow everything's going to work itself out. But I don't think that's true. I think the only way that we heal our lives, families, and the world is from healing ourselves from within. And then letting that goodness that we figure out, letting that healing spread to other people around us, our families, our communities, and lighting the beacons, so to speak. But I know that everything, and I mean everything about our lives, we can heal. I know that's true because I've seen miraculous healings in my own life and the lives of so many of my friends and family. I think that healing it's returning to a state of balance and wholeness. And balance and wholeness, that's a state that we rarely experience in our modern world today. And I'm starting to think that honestly, that might be by design to try to keep us stuck in poverty and illness and all these low level emotions that we feel like stress and anger. The system that we live in is not designed for us, and it's not designed to benefit our best wholeness. The thing is that all of us, whoever we are, wherever we're from, we all deserve to feel whole. We deserve to feel balanced. And I think we deserve to feel healthy and full of life as our default state. Sure, sometimes there's going to be traumatic things that happen and there's going to be challenges that come up. But this overall state of balance and health and wholeness, that's our birthright. It's our birthright as human beings. And it's our birthright as living creatures on this beautiful earth that we inhabit. It's our birthright as divine, eternal, spiritual beings. Things, if they get sick, they're not supposed to be sick forever. They're supposed to be sick for a time until the system can correct itself and get back to wholeness. So if you are feeling sick in your life, or anybody that you know, if you're facing these chronic issues like depression, anxiety, chronic health things like autoimmune diseases and cancer even, these things are symptoms of some kind of deeper imbalance within our lives. And that has been a totally game-changing perspective for me as I've had to do my own healing work. We have to balance the mind, the body, and the spirit. We have to live in balance in our communities and the global ecology, and we have to have balance within ourselves. So seriously, wherever you are today, or whoever you love that is struggling with something and you just can't seem to find a solution out of the problem, I promise you that we can really heal it. I know we can heal it. I've seen it. And so let's talk about how that's possible. To begin to heal, I believe the first thing that we need to do is to shift our mentality about what is possible. We have to believe that healing is actually possible. We have to get out of the doom and gloom diagnoses that we often get about our health, mental health, physical, emotional health challenges. And we have to change our paradigm about the environments and the world that we live in. We have to understand that we are sick, and it's because our world is sick. And that is the exact theme that I'm talking about this week on Oversoul. It comes from a book from Dr. Gabor Mate, the myth of normal. It's all about how our world is out of balance, and that is what's making us sick. Being sick is not normal. It's just the state that we live in. The food that we eat, the technology we use, the media we consume, none of it is normal. It's unprecedented in human history. The world has changed so rapidly in the last decades or even the last 100 years that the world we live in today is indistinguishable from the balanced world and the balanced way people lived in for hundreds of thousands of years. And we just can't keep up. Our nervous systems can't keep up. Our immune systems can't keep up. Our social stability can't keep up. We've fallen out of balance in essentially every way possible. And we're sick because of it. But we think that the way we live is, quote, normal, because for most of us, that's all we've ever known. On this channel, there are some people who are older in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and there are people who are younger, teens and early 20s. And some of the older listeners, they can remember a time before digital technologies and internet took over the world, and they can remember going outside, playing with their friends all day, riding their bikes all day, and their parents not even knowing where they were. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, only that the world is very different. And today when we're born, we are born into this system that is so all-encompassing, we don't even really know what to do about it. Like many of the listeners here, this is just an example. I grew up eating Cocoa Pebbles and Captain Crunch. Those are my two favorite cereals. And I'd eat them most every day before school. And I'd eat them with milk in my bowl. And if I was lucky, I might even have a Pop-Tart. My favorite Pop-Tarts were the s'mores ones. And I never thought anything about it. The commercials that I would watch as a kid, they told me that this is part of a balanced breakfast. But there's nothing balanced about that, right? Cocoa Pebbles, Captain Crunch are just full of sugar and maybe a little bit of unhealthy, unnatural carbs and all kinds of other ingredients that who even knows what they are. And then you have milk, all this dairy, and like, should we be drinking milk? Should we be drinking dairy? I don't know. I'm not claiming to be a health expert in this regard, but all I know is that breakfast I was eating every day was not balanced at all. But I thought it was normal. And I thought it was normal because my TV shows told me it was normal. So what all my friends were doing was normal. And when you're a kid, you don't really even have the ability to question things like that. I just thought it was delicious, so that's what I had. And I think about, being juiced up on all of that sugar and going to school and trying to get through the day, and it just wasn't normal. It's not normal to sit in school all day as a young kid anyway. And there's all of these things in our lives that we believe are just normal, but they're not. It's not normal to grow up, move to a new city, leave everybody that you know behind, all your friends and family. That's not normal. Living in isolation and loneliness that way, that's not how we evolved to live. And there's no wonder we feel sick. Single family households, all of this pressure to raise kids alone in a single little box with, just your mom, just your dad. And I know there's other family arrangements too, but that's what we think is the norm. But more specifically, all of that stress usually falls on the mothers. And that's not normal either. All these screens we have, they shoot blue light into our eyes at night. That's not normal. And I really feel like when you start looking at this way that we live, none of it makes any sense. It's not prioritizing our well-being. So it's easy to see where our discontent and all of these illnesses start to bubble up and come from. And that's what Dr. Mate is trying to point out to us as the central thesis of this book. We're chronically stressed, lonely, overworked, repressed. I mean, you name it. And it needs to change or else we're not going to be able to get better. So Dr. Mate, he highlights this idea that everything exists in connection and balance. This is the mind, body, spirit. And that's mind, body, spirit as one word, not with hyphens or periods between them. mind, body, spirit. Because when you try to separate those three things, the mind, body, spirit, that doesn't make any sense. There's this idea in science that has been prevalent over the last 100, 200 years that we have to break everything down into its constituent parts to understand how the whole operates. But that is kind of a logical fallacy. And it's a result of a scientific, philosophical worldview that does not prioritize wellness the way that we need to. We think that if you look at a car, you can break it all down into its parts. You can see how the gears work and the tires work. And that if you can put them all together, then that's going to be a functioning car. But we're not the same way, because we are not just these mechanical pieces of a car. We're mind, body, spirit, emotion. And you can't see and measure and analyze all of those things. So that's the quote that Dr. Mate uses from another doctor named Candace Pert. She says, "Unless we can measure something, science won't concede it exists, which is why science refuses to deal with such non-things as emotions, the mind, the soul, or the spirit." So much of our illness comes from this false belief that we hold about the world that parts make up the whole, instead of the whole influencing the parts. And that's also one of the central ideas behind consciousness. Are we conscious beings just because our brains form all these neural connections? If they do, okay. And that leads us to AI technology. And people think if we can just replicate the way that the brain works, then one day we will have this supreme artificial life, artificial intelligence that will be human or superhuman. And that's a big philosophical idea. But I tend to think the opposite way. And there are many biologists and thinkers who are starting to adopt this paradigm as well. It's an old paradigm. It's the paradigm that our consciousness is actually what influences the parts. So cells in our body, when they develop, when they grow organs, when they grow arms and limbs, they are acting as these independent conscious agents that are directed by the larger consciousness, which is our spirits and selves. Wild idea. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail in future videos. But when we have this perspective, we can start to see how our bodies, our minds, our spirits can become sick when we try to break them into these constituent parts. Think about times when you have been sick and you've gone to see a doctor. How often do the doctors sit with you and try to understand what's actually going on in your life? For most of us, that's actually pretty rare. My experiences most often with a doctor, and given I live in the United States, might be different in other places of the world. But when I go to see a doctor, I sit down with them for maximum 5 minutes. I tell them what my symptoms are, and they make some notes. They prescribe me some medicine, pharmaceutical, and then I leave. And for some things, some sicknesses or illnesses, that might work just fine. The other day, I took my little girl, who's 1, I took her to the doctor because she was tugging at her ear, and I thought that meant she probably had an ear infection. And the doctors, they looked in her ear, they could see the bacteria, or however that works, and they prescribed her an antibiotic. So she took the antibiotic and she started to feel better within a couple days because that antibiotic killed the infection. And that's great. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. But that approach doesn't always work. It works for some things, but not for other things. Sometimes these illnesses that we face are far more complicated than a simple antibiotic can fix. Things like mental health illnesses, autoimmune disorders, even big things like cancer. When we face these types of challenges, we can often feel a bit pathologized as doctors take us and they try to break us down into our constituent parts. And they think that in doing that, they'll find some solution to our illness or what we're experiencing. But in doing that, we're missing the bigger stories of our lives. We're missing that mind, body, soul connection. When we take a more whole or balanced approach to our health, we can find healing in deep and sometimes unexpected ways. In The Myth of Normal, Dr. Mate talks about some very interesting examples of this mind body connection and how it works. The first example he gives, which kind of paints the whole picture, is this woman, Caroline from Pennsylvania, who has this relationship with Dr. Mate later in her life. In the book, she is quoted as saying, "I was 36 when they told me it was a very early breast cancer. At that time, they gave me a timeline of 1 to 2 years. My boys were very young, only 8 and 9. I've just turned 56, so I've beaten all their records." She says, looking at my own mortality and them telling me I had 12 to 24 months, I got extremely profane with the doctor and said I needed 10 years to raise my boys to be men. I will do anything in my power to raise them to be men. And then Caroline, she kind of jokes, but she really said this. When she was with the doctor, she used this profane language, and she said, "F your statistics." Dr. Mate, when he was interviewing Caroline about this story, he told her that her profanity, saying "F your statistics," actually probably helped her extend her own life. And there was a reason for it. Dr. Mate talks about how Caroline, she was always a caretaker. She was always coming to somebody's rescue, even sometimes to her own detriment. And many of us have been in relationships and situations like this ourselves, so we can relate. Caroline quotes, "I never wanted to have conflict with anyone, and I always had to be in charge, making sure everything was okay." Dr. Mate, he said that Caroline exhibited this big word. He called it super autonomous self-sufficiency, which he says is like an outsized aversion to asking anything of anyone. Dr. Mate talks about how that is not a normal human response. A normal, healthy response is to have appropriate boundaries, to be able to say no, to be able to protect yourself and protect your own will and sense of what you want to do. But her response, her super autonomous self-sufficiency, is actually a trauma response from early bad things that happened in her childhood. So in this perspective, Caroline, when she gets this breast cancer diagnosis, it was a signal that there was something emotional or spiritual far deeper down that was going on in her life that she needed to heal. The cancer was a manifestation of this deep state of unwholeness within herself. So Dr. Mate, he's talking about how Caroline's courage when she stood up to her doctor and didn't, accept that statistic, it actually extended her life. And she was able to extend her life, at least to this point, to the time of the book was written, by another 25 years. So she at least 10x'd the amount of life expectancy that these doctors gave her statistically. And in this way, her relationship with the cancer, it was just a reflection of this really deep emotional wound that she carried in her life. And her body was reacting to the chronic stress of that. And there's many other examples as well. Dr. Mate talks about how there's a disease, ALS, which has another big word, and I'm not a doctor, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's a nerve cell or a kind of a brain disease, a disease of your nervous system. And these patients in this clinic and in many places around the world had this weird connection that most of the people with ALS were exceptionally nice people. And I think when we say nice people, there's a good connotation, but there's also a bad connotation with that word sometimes. For these people, they were exceptionally nice. They were like Caroline. They were super autonomously nice. And it's kind of funny because nurses and doctors, they could almost make a prediction about if someone is going to have ALS with shockingly high, statistically significant accuracy if the patient was nice or not. And sometimes they would say, oh, this patient doesn't have ALS because this patient does not have ALS because they are not nice enough. Or, you understand what I'm talking about. So there's even these professional peer-reviewed papers that confirm this association between niceness and ALS. There's a peer-reviewed published journal in this British medicine magazine, professional journal thing. This is the title of it. Patients with ALS are usually nice persons. How physicians experienced in ALS see the personality characteristics of their patients. So there's a very real connection between this disease and people being overly compensatingly, quote, nice guys. There's a connection between this repressed anger, hurt, or other emotions that masks as extreme niceness in this people. And when people are masking these emotions, they are literally making themselves sick. The same type of correlation is found in men that have prostate cancer. Nice guys, or guys who tend to suppress their anger more, are more likely to have prostate cancer. And it's because they have diminished, the word is natural killer cells that typically protect the immune system. The natural killer cells, when they're diminished in men, means that men have more of an exception to getting sick and to getting these really bad diseases. And the natural killer cells can also be diminished and are most often diminished in men who have chronic stresses, the biggest one being emotional isolation. So we can tie that all back together, how if men are more likely to get sick when they are not in these normal environments where you're with friends and family and part of a community, or when you're too nice of a guy. I mean, it's just crazy how all of this stuff ties together. There's also a link that Dr. Mate talks about in this book, The Myth of Normal, that confirms the link between unprocessed grief and lymphatic/blood cancers. So parents who have lost a child have double the risk of developing a disease. And one of the most common ones that's developed is multiple sclerosis. There were studies that were conducted from parents who had children who were killed in war. And these parents were 2 to 4 times more likely to develop a blood or, some type of cancer because they had lost a kid. And Dr. Mate talks about how these traumatic experiences like loss, our body responds to the loss, but it's not the actual loss that makes us sick. It's how our bodies respond to that loss. So it's to say that if you lose a child, it doesn't automatically mean that you are going to develop a disease. But what it does mean is that if you can't, in a healthy way, process the grief, if you can't push that negative emotion through your body and process it in the right way, it's going to get stuck. And in getting stuck, it actually causes us to get sick. So there's all of these studies, and I'm sure there's hundreds more that we could talk about. They really link how our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health all work together. Mind, body, spirit. So it's not fair to try to dissect people, pathologize people, and make them feel like there's something wrong with them, when really it's this paradigm or this entire perspective about life that is making us chronically sick. So if you or someone you know is facing any of these challenges, it could be anything, right? It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be sickness, it could be illness, it could be cancer, it could be PTSD, I mean, eating disorders, I mean, everything in the world that we talk about on this channel. I just want to say first that I honor you, I respect you. What you're dealing with is very real, and what you're dealing with can be healed. And I know that it can be healed. I have seen how things can be healed in my own life. And everything we're going to talk about today and everything we're going to talk about on the channel is to give you hope and optimism that you can do this, you can heal, you can get better. All of us can, we can have a better life. The very real story that I want to share as we get to concluding this thing is that I had my very own, what I would quote, miraculous healing experience where after we lost my father-in-law, Paul, I felt terribly depressed. There were days I couldn't get out of bed. There were days when I wondered what the point of living was. And in this terrible state, I understood that we had to start seeking healing. And I've shared this story about these depressive symptoms that I had. And, Dr. Mate and I, we both really appreciate this healing ceremony and journey called ayahuasca. He practices ayahuasca almost every year when he takes groups of clients and people down to some connections that he has in the Peruvian rainforest and helps people to process and work through trauma, grief, whatever, and be healed with this very cool plant medicine. And I think why ayahuasca is so cool is because it helps us to connect this mind, body, spirit in a really interesting way. The actual drink itself has purgative properties, and it can help you clean up your digestive tract. It can help you with your gut mind connection. And it also is very interesting at helping you process emotions. And I think it taps into kind of this spiritual aspect of our lives as well. So it's this, I'm not saying that ayahuasca is going to heal everything in the world, only that this holistic approach is something that really benefits people. And I think that that is indicative of the indigenous worldview as a whole. The indigenous peoples of the world hold this memory, these medicines, this legacy of how to heal and live in balance with ourselves, communities, and the world from a time before all this rapid technological, economical, political change and growth happened in the world. So there's so much wisdom there. And I think sometimes it can be this very paradigm altering thing for, Western folk. And I say Western, it's not really Western folk. It's people who have been indoctrinated in this myth of normal. Sometimes we can look at those indigenous practices and you might have some biases towards it that, it's just superstition or it's just like a placebo. But I really don't think that it is, because you can look at the data, you can listen to stories, you can talk with results from real people, and they can point to how these ceremonies help them. So I want to share my exact experience with this. When I was feeling these depressive symptoms, I found my way to ayahuasca. And in this ayahuasca ceremony, I was able to emotionally, spiritually connect with my mind, body, soul. It's almost like I could see myself. And I had this ability in this altered state of consciousness to perceive that there was a weight on my heart that was weighing me down. And it's almost like I could reach in an energetic way and I could remove this tumor. And I was surprised to find that there was this energetic, black, kind of writhing tumor that was in my heart. And when I pulled it out, I found that I could observe it. And as I'm observing it, there was this question that popped into my mind. And I don't know if the question came from myself or if it came from somewhere beyond me, but it was profound to me. And the question simply asked me, what is this? As I'm kind of perceiving this thing that I felt like I pulled out of my heart, I said, it's depression. And then another question came is, how did it get in there? And I said, I don't know. I wasn't aware that I was really holding this thing within myself. I didn't know that I was feeling, quote, depressed this way. And then the question was more of it. Well, I guess it was more of a statement was, it's not yours to hold on to anymore. And I realized that's true. And I saw this vision, how this thing, this energy that was now had nestled into my heart was passed down from generations and generations and generations of people within my family. who had all had this thing come through them, pass through them, without being able to give it a name, without being able to understand what it was. And here I was, it came to me, and I had the opportunity through this beautiful indigenous ayahuasca ceremony to release the energy of that thing. And as I released it, I was able to see that I didn't have to feel that way anymore, and I could pass that down to, and I didn't have to pass it down to the rest of my family. So a beautiful experience for me. And I've never felt that deep, deep, dark, depressive symptom ever since. So that's my experience. And that's my belief that for me personally, I know that we can heal from these things. And there's many ways that we heal. I think everybody's experience is completely different. Everybody walks their own journey because everyone has had their own life experiences, their own inherited traumas, their own generational stuff going on. But I know that everybody can heal. And I'm so excited on this channel that I get to share so many stories coming up of people who have found ways to heal their lives by healing this mind-body connection Dr. Mate talks about. And I'm just so fascinated by the different ways that people are able to heal and find this mind-body medicine for themselves. It is so beautiful and amazing to me. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. That's my message for today. We can heal our lives. We can heal the world. The world is broken. You're not broken, but we can heal it. And we heal it one person at a time, going deep, realizing what's going on with us, and trying to heal this mind-body connection. I love you. I support you. I see you. And I'm looking forward to connecting with you in future videos. Thank you so much.